I can't eat. Not for 9 days. Baxter's deep, mournful sigh seemed to echo through the quiet sanctuary, a sound that drew the attention of every caretaker on the team. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The massive gorilla had been lying quietly in the corner of his enclosure for hours, refusing every tray of food that the staff placed in front of him. His eyes, normally so bright and full of curiosity, now seemed clouded and heavy, carrying a weight that made even the most experienced keepers hold their breath. Across the room, Anna, a young animal behaviorist, glanced nervously at her colleague, Jake, who was pacing back and forth beside the gates, checking the clock for the third time in the last 10 minutes. They had tried every strategy, different fruits, vegetables, and even his favorite treats, but Baxter simply turned away each time, pushing back from the mesh barrier as if he were silently signaling that nothing could satisfy him. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the soft hum of the sanctuary's ventilation system and the occasional distant call of other animals. But it was the quiet from Baxter that dominated everything. The sanctuary had always been a place of structured routine and careful monitoring. Yet for the first time in years, a sense of helplessness had crept into the hearts of the staff. Baxter was not just refusing to eat. He was conveying a deep, incomprehensible message, one that made Anna feel the hairs on her neck stand on end. She moved closer, speaking softly, her voice calm and soothing as she offered a slice of ripe mango, one of his absolute favorites. Baxter lifted his massive head slightly, eyes following her movement, but he did not reach out or even make a sound. The staff had never seen him act like this. It was subtle, but every gesture, every shift of weight on his enormous frame was a signal that something extraordinary was about to happen. Outside the enclosure, the morning sunlight spilled through the trees, casting long, warm beams across the concrete floor, highlighting the dust particles that floated lazily in the air. The sanctuary felt eerily still, as if the world itself were holding its breath in anticipation. Anna glanced toward the main gate, hoping for the scheduled delivery of supplies to arrive on time, but her eyes kept drifting back to Baxter, watching his slow, deliberate movements. His chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm, but there was a tension there, a subtle tremor that spoke of fatigue and longing. She knelt slightly, keeping her voice gentle, recounting memories of simpler times when Baxter would greet her with playful gestures and expectantly snatch treats from her hand. The thought of those days now seemed both distant and painfully close, reminding her of the bond that had developed over years of trust and care. Somewhere deep inside the sanctuary, the other gorillas were moving, their familiar sounds a quiet background to the profound stillness surrounding Baxter. He was aware of them, but he did not respond. His attention was entirely fixed on the main entrance, as though he were waiting for someone who had once been an essential part of his life. Anna's stomach tightened with a mixture of concern and hope. She knew that gorillas were intelligent, emotional creatures, capable of forming connections that spanned years. And right now, in this silent, charged room, Baxter's gaze and posture were telling a story that words could barely capture. A story of anticipation, of recognition, of a bond that was about to be tested and proven once again. The morning sun continued to stream through the high windows of the sanctuary, casting golden patterns across the concrete floor and the surrounding foliage. Yet the energy in the room remained subdued as the staff moved quietly around Baxter's enclosure. Every caretaker knew the stakes were unusually high today, each movement deliberate and careful, as if they were navigating a space charged with an invisible tension. Jake walked along the perimeter, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes on Baxter's behavior while his eyes never strayed far from the gorilla. He noted the slight rise and fall of Baxter's shoulders, the slow, deliberate way he shifted his weight from one massive foot to the other, the subtle twitch of his ears in response to the distant sounds of birds and the other gorillas in the sanctuary. Across the room, Anna was kneeling close to the feeding area, arranging a variety of fresh fruits, vegetables, and treats in neat rows, making sure that every piece was within easy reach without forcing it on him. The air smelled faintly of bananas and apples, the scent carefully chosen to appeal to Baxter's known preferences. Yet despite this familiar aroma, he remained still, head lowered, eyes heavy, conveying a sense of profound weariness. The sanctuary itself seemed almost to hold its breath, the usual bustle of activity reduced to hushed whispers and careful steps, as if the very environment understood the fragile state of the gorilla at the center of it all. Anna gently spoke his name, her voice soft and steady, recounting small, everyday moments from previous days when Baxter had been healthy and lively, offering reassurance and familiarity through sound, hoping that the subtle cues of human presence would provide comfort. At intervals, the other keepers would glance toward the control station, watching for any sign of change, their expressions a mix of hope and anxiety. Outside the enclosure, the warm breeze carried the scent of the surrounding forest, rustling leaves and distant bird calls that usually brought a sense of calm. Yet today, each sound seemed to emphasize the extraordinary quiet inside. Anna shifted slightly, repositioning a tray of treats a few feet closer, watching for any flicker of interest or movement. But Baxter's attention remained fixed elsewhere, his gaze toward the sanctuary entrance, as though anticipating an arrival long overdue. Time seemed to stretch, each minute carrying a weight heavier than the last, and with every careful observation, the caretakers became more acutely aware of the depth of the bond Baxter had formed over the years, a bond built on trust, routine, and mutual recognition. They whispered to each other about the importance of patience, of allowing Baxter to take the lead, understanding that pushing him would only cause stress and potentially break the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. In this carefully orchestrated environment, every gesture, every glance, every breath carried significance, and though the morning sun shone brightly, the attention of all present was focused solely on Baxter, on the slow, steady rhythm of his movements, on the invisible story being conveyed through his posture and gaze, a story that would soon take a turn as the day progressed, and the person he had been waiting for finally crossed the threshold of the sanctuary. As the hours passed, Baxter began to shift more noticeably, his massive body slowly moving across the enclosure with a grace that belied his exhaustion. His eyes tracked every subtle movement of the staff, lingering on Anna as she adjusted the trays of fruit and vegetables, her careful hands placing each item just within reach, as though inviting him to take it when he was ready. Jake stopped pacing for a moment and watched Baxter from a distance, his brow furrowed with concern and curiosity. He could see the subtle tension in Baxter's shoulders and the way his fingers, massive and powerful, gently tapped against the floor, a sign of anticipation or perhaps a silent plea. Anna leaned closer, lowering her voice to a soft murmur, recounting stories from previous weeks when Baxter had been healthy, playful, and full of life, hoping that the familiar tones of her voice might trigger recognition and interest. The enclosure was filled with the gentle ambient noises of the sanctuary, the soft rustling of leaves, distant calls of other animals, and the faint hum of air systems. But these were almost drowned out by the charged silence surrounding Baxter. Every caretaker present could feel it, a delicate balance of hope and apprehension, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Baxter lifted his head slightly, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond the enclosure, flicking toward the sanctuary entrance with a focus that suggested he was waiting, anticipating someone. The sunlight filtering through the canopy created warm highlights on his dark fur, emphasizing the contours of his strong frame, yet his movements remained measured and deliberate, as if he were saving every ounce of energy for something crucial. Anna shifted again, placing a small bowl of water and a carefully peeled banana closer to him, speaking softly and deliberately, repeating his name in gentle tones that carried familiarity. Baxter's ears twitched at each sound, his massive chest rising and falling with a rhythm that hinted at both fatigue and expectation. Time seemed to stretch in this moment, the usual sense of routine suspended, and every heartbeat of those present seemed synchronized with the quiet tension of anticipation. The staff whispered among themselves, careful not to disturb the fragile atmosphere, noting every minuscule signal in Baxter's behavior, interpreting the subtlest gestures for hints of change. Beyond the enclosure, The forest swayed gently in the morning breeze, casting dappled light and shadows across the ground. Yet nothing outside seemed to draw Baxter's attention. His focus was unbroken, fixed on the entrance where the first signs of movement from someone familiar might appear. Anna kept her hands steady, her words calm, maintaining a rhythm that Baxter could recognize, a pattern of safety and reassurance she had established over years of care. With each subtle adjustment, the tension in the room rose, an almost imperceptible electricity that connected Baxter, the caretakers, and the space around them, making every small motion seem monumental, and every glance a meaningful message waiting to be understood. As the day progressed slowly and the anticipated arrival drew closer with each passing moment. The anticipation in the sanctuary grew as the morning moved toward midday, the staff collectively sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Baxter remained in the center of his enclosure, his posture tense yet poised, every movement deliberate, signaling an intensity that the caretakers could not ignore. Jake moved closer to the gate, adjusting the harness of his radio, his eyes scanning the path leading to the sanctuary entrance. Anna stayed low to the ground, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the feeding area, her voice soft, repeating Baxter's name in a rhythmic cadence that had been a part of their daily interactions for years. Every sound in the sanctuary seemed magnified, the soft rustle of leaves outside, the distant call of a blue jay, the gentle hum of the ventilation system, all forming a subtle backdrop to the almost palpable tension around Baxter. The gorilla shifted, lifting his head just slightly, tilting it as if listening intently for a particular sound, his eyes narrowing toward the entrance where the first hints of movement could appear. Anna could see the muscles in his shoulders tense, the subtle flex of his powerful arms, and the way his fingers lightly grazed the concrete floor, a combination of anticipation and restraint. The caretakers whispered to each other, noting how Baxter's attention had narrowed, how he seemed to wait for an arrival that only he could sense. Every minute that passed stretched longer than the last, filled with the quiet sound of breathing and the distant movements of other animals. Yet Baxter's focus remained unbroken, as though time itself had slowed to accommodate his expectations. Suddenly, a sound at the far end of the sanctuary drew a flicker of motion from him, a subtle shift that made Jake stop mid-step and Anna freeze, their eyes locked on him. Baxter rose slightly, moving forward with measured steps, each one deliberate, and the way he adjusted his weight showed a precision born of both strength and intelligence. Anna and Jake exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement that the moment of change was imminent, that Baxter's attention had locked onto something or someone familiar, something that had the potential to alter the atmosphere entirely. The gorilla's eyes were wide and alert now, scanning the area as though he were piecing together a long-forgotten memory, every feature of his massive face etched with focus and expectancy. The ambient sounds of the sanctuary seemed to recede, leaving only the gentle echo of footsteps from the far end of the entrance, the subtle creak of the gates, and the soft rustle of leaves carried by a faint breeze through the open windows. Baxter's posture shifted further, signaling readiness without tension, a poised alertness that contrasted with the earlier listless energy, and Anna noted how the rhythm of his breathing had changed, a subtle sign that something in his environment had registered differently, something meaningful. For a moment, the room was filled with a quiet, shared understanding between the caretakers, as if everyone present recognized the importance of what Baxter was sensing, the significance of the connection he was about to make, and the anticipation built steadily, each second drawing out the suspense, heightening the sense that the extraordinary moment they had all been waiting for was right on the horizon. As the sound of footsteps grew louder near the sanctuary entrance, Baxter's posture shifted subtly, a change so slight that only the most attentive eyes could detect it. His massive shoulders rose and fell with measured breaths, his eyes now locked on a figure moving purposefully toward him, a person whose presence seemed to resonate deeply within his memory. Anna held her breath, her hand resting gently on the edge of the enclosure, while Jake adjusted his stance, trying to remain calm, but feeling a surge of anticipation. The figure approached steadily, a man named Logan, who had once been Baxter's primary caretaker during his early years at the sanctuary, a person whose calm voice and familiar gestures had shaped much of Baxter's routine and sense of safety. As Logan stepped through the gate, the ambient sounds of the sanctuary seemed to fade, the distant calls of birds and the rustle of leaves providing only a soft backdrop to the intensity in Baxter's gaze. The gorilla lifted his massive head higher, ears twitching at the familiar scent and voice, his eyes reflecting a mixture of recognition and tentative hope. He shifted his weight carefully, moving toward the front of the enclosure with deliberate steps that carried both anticipation and restraint, his immense form moving with a quiet elegance that commanded attention. Anna quietly narrated past moments to Jake, recalling Baxter's early days under Logan's care, the playful interactions, the trust they had developed, and the gentle guidance Logan had provided, all in an effort to reinforce the sense of familiarity that Baxter might recognize. The closer Logan came, the more subtle movements Baxter made were noticeable, the small lean forward, the slight stretch of his arms, the quiet, intentional pacing that communicated both eagerness and uncertainty. Anna noticed a change in Baxter's eyes, a flicker of focus and attention that had not been present for days, and she whispered to Jake that this could be the turning point they had been waiting for, the moment when years of care and connection might finally bear visible fruit. Jake nodded quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile moment, while his eyes remained fixed on the interaction, noting the way Baxter's fingers traced gentle arcs across the floor, a form of communication that seemed instinctive yet deliberate. The tension in the sanctuary was almost tangible, each breath held collectively as all attention focused on the approaching figure and the gorilla, whose behavior suggested a recognition that transcended time. Baxter continued to advance with measured steps, stopping occasionally to gaze directly at Logan, as if confirming that this was indeed the person he had been waiting for, his head tilting slightly with a thoughtful motion that spoke of deep memory and connection. The staff watched in awe, sensing the weight of the moment, understanding that the interaction unfolding before them was more than a simple reunion. It was a silent dialogue, a communication of trust, longing, and the bonds formed through years of care and attention. The morning light fell across Baxter's powerful form, illuminating the contours of his face and highlighting the intelligence and emotion reflected in his eyes. Each step he took was deliberate, controlled, and filled with a quiet anticipation that seemed to slow time around him. Anna felt a lump rise in her throat, realizing that the long days of worry and careful observation were converging toward this singular instant, a point where the years of relationship between human and gorilla were about to manifest in the smallest gestures, the subtle movements, and the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was taking place in the sanctuary. As Logan stepped closer to the enclosure, the transformation in Baxter became unmistakable. The gorilla's eyes widened with recognition, a spark igniting a depth of emotion that the caretakers had not witnessed for days. His massive chest rose and fell more quickly, a subtle sign of excitement and anticipation, and he lifted his hand slowly, reaching toward Logan with careful deliberation. Anna and Jake watched with bated breath, knowing that this was the pivotal moment, the point where all tension and concern would either culminate in despair or release into something profoundly moving. Baxter took a few measured steps forward, pausing briefly to ensure that Logan's movements were gentle and deliberate, showing that the reunion was guided by respect and recognition rather than urgency. Logan stopped just short of the barrier, crouching slightly, extending his hand slowly, the familiar scent and voice combining to create an unmistakable sense of familiarity that Baxter immediately responded to. The gorilla's massive frame seemed to soften, and for the first time in 9 days, he approached the food that had been offered but did not yet eat, instead focusing intently on the presence of the person who had once been his primary caretaker. Baxter let out a low, almost hesitant rumble, a sound that carried both acknowledgement and trust, signaling that he was ready to re-establish the bond that had formed over years of care. Anna felt a rush of emotion as she observed the interaction, recognizing the silent communication passing between gorilla and human, a dialogue of gestures, glances, and measured movements that spoke volumes without words. Baxter's head tilted slightly, eyes scanning Logan's face, taking in every detail, and then, with a deliberate slowness that conveyed both confidence and careful consideration, he extended a massive hand toward Logan, allowing him to place a favorite treat in his palm. The gorilla sniffed it cautiously, paused, and then, in a subtle but powerful gesture of trust and recognition, accepted the food, eating slowly while keeping eyes locked on Logan. A sense of relief and awe washed over the staff, as the tension that had gripped the sanctuary for days released in this quiet, profound moment of connection. Jake exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of concern lift slightly, and Anna's eyes glistened as she whispered softly about the resilience and intelligence of these creatures, noting how Baxter's behavior reflected not just hunger for sustenance, but an emotional engagement that only someone deeply familiar to him could provoke. The morning light highlighted the contours of his massive face, illuminating the nuanced expressions of relief, recognition, and tentative joy that crossed his features. Each movement of Baxter's body was deliberate, a choreography of trust that unfolded slowly but unmistakably, as Logan mirrored the same careful, patient gestures that had guided him during Baxter's formative years. The enclosure seemed to breathe along with Baxter, the stillness punctuated only by the low rumble of his acknowledgement and the soft exhalations of caretakers witnessing the subtle miracle of recognition and emotional resonance. Time appeared suspended, each second magnifying the significance of the reunion, and the sanctuary felt imbued with a quiet reverence, as if acknowledging the profound connection that had been momentarily lost but was now being tenderly reclaimed. Baxter's acceptance of the treat was more than a physical act. It was a restoration of trust, a reaffirmation of the bond that spanned years, a powerful reminder that the emotional ties between human and animal could transcend absence, testing, and time, and that in the simple acts of recognition and gentle interaction, a sense of healing and restoration could emerge, bringing relief, joy, and hope to all who had waited so long to witness this remarkable moment. The atmosphere in the sanctuary shifted noticeably as Baxter slowly began to engage more with his surroundings, his posture becoming less rigid, and his movements infused with a cautious curiosity. Anna stepped back slightly, allowing space for Baxter to explore the enclosure at his own pace, while Jake remained at the edge, quietly observing every subtle change. The gorilla's eyes, once heavy and distant, now held a glimmer of recognition, scanning the familiar features of Logan with a depth of understanding that seemed to bridge the years of separation. Baxter moved closer to the food that had been placed near the barrier earlier, but he did not consume it immediately, instead pausing to glance at Logan, as if seeking reassurance and approval before taking the next step. Logan responded with a gentle nod and a soft tone, encouraging Baxter through familiar gestures and words that had always conveyed safety and trust. The subtle exchange was observed by the staff with a mixture of awe and restrained excitement, understanding that this interaction was not merely about feeding, but about the re-establishment of a profound emotional connection. Baxter lifted a massive hand and lightly touched the edge of the barrier, his touch deliberate and controlled, demonstrating both recognition and tentative confidence, a clear signal to all present that he understood Logan's presence and intentions. As the morning sunlight shifted through the canopy above, casting patterns on the floor, Baxter slowly lowered his head and took a small portion of the fruit offered by Logan, his eyes never leaving the caretaker's face, creating a shared moment of trust and acknowledgement. Anna felt her heart tighten with emotion, recognizing the subtle signs of relief and tentative joy crossing Baxter's expression, a silent communication of gratitude and recognition. Jake whispered softly to Anna about the remarkable intelligence and emotional depth of these animals, noting how Baxter's behavior reflected both anticipation and a deep-seated memory that connected him to Logan beyond simple familiarity. The gorilla's movements became more fluid, a delicate balance of confidence and care as he continued to interact with the food and Logan, each gesture reinforcing the invisible thread of connection that had persisted despite the days of refusal and quiet withdrawal. Baxter paused frequently, each time returning his gaze to Logan, and with each look, the staff could feel the intensity of the bond being reaffirmed, a bond that had been tested by absence and now strengthened by reunion. The soft rustle of leaves from the breeze outside, the distant calls of other animals, and the faint hum of the sanctuary's ventilation system created a gentle rhythm around them, But within the enclosure, time seemed suspended, the space charged with anticipation and subtle triumph. As Baxter gradually accepted more of the food offered, his chest rose and fell with a calmer rhythm, and a soft, low rumble emerged from deep within him, a sound that conveyed comfort, recognition, and a tentative sense of security. Anna and Jake exchanged quiet smiles, feeling a shared sense of accomplishment and relief, witnessing a moment that transcended ordinary care, a moment where trust, patience, and years of understanding culminated in a simple yet profoundly moving acknowledgement. The entire sanctuary seemed to hold its breath with Baxter, as the gorilla's tentative engagement marked not only a physical recovery, but the emotional reconnection that everyone present had been waiting for, a reminder of the extraordinary bonds that can exist between humans and the remarkable animals in their care, and the quiet power of recognition, trust, and emotional resonance that can transform even the most fragile and tense moments into profound shared experience. The room seemed to exhale collectively as Baxter continued to interact with Logan, his movements growing more confident and fluid with each passing moment. Anna took a small step back, giving him the space he needed, while Jake remained still, his eyes locked on the scene, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary unfold. Baxter's eyes met Logan's with a profound intensity, a connection that words could not capture, communicating gratitude, recognition, and the unspoken bond they had nurtured over the years. Slowly, Baxter began to move toward the front of the enclosure, pausing only to glance at the carefully arranged trays of food, and then returning his attention to Logan, as if confirming that the caretaker's presence was the most important element in the moment. Logan, sensing the gorilla's trust and anticipation, crouched slightly and extended his arm with a small treat in his hand, offering it not as an instruction, but as a gesture of reassurance and recognition. Baxter reached out with deliberate care, taking the treat gently and pausing to chew slowly while maintaining eye contact, an act that conveyed both confidence and a sense of shared understanding. The staff could feel the atmosphere shift, a palpable energy of relief, hope, and emotional release spreading through the sanctuary, and even the distant sounds of other animals seemed to soften in acknowledgement of the reunion taking place. Anna whispered softly to Jake about the intelligence and emotional depth of gorillas, noting how Baxter's gestures, pauses, and attentive gaze were more than simple responses. They were an expression of complex thought and emotional engagement. Each movement was measured, deliberate, and imbued with meaning, a silent dialogue unfolding in real time that captured the essence of the bond between human and animal. As Baxter accepted more of the food offered, his posture relaxed, and a gentle rumble emerged from deep within him, a sound that seemed to convey contentment, reassurance, and recognition. Logan spoke softly, narrating familiar routines and small stories of their past interactions, reinforcing the gorilla's sense of safety and familiarity, which Baxter acknowledged with subtle nods and attentive gestures. The light streaming through the windows illuminated the soft contours of Baxter's face and the smooth, purposeful movements of his arms and hands, highlighting both his physical presence and the emotional resonance of the moment. The sanctuary, usually filled with the busy sounds of caretakers and animals, seemed to settle into a quiet reverence, every observer present captivated by the profound emotional exchange. Baxter paused periodically, lifting his massive head to meet Logan's gaze, and then gently interacting with the environment around him, demonstrating awareness, trust, and the tentative rebuilding of confidence. Each gesture reinforced the mutual understanding, a sense of comfort and recognition that transcended the absence of words, creating a scene of shared emotional clarity and healing. The staff felt a mixture of awe and gratitude, understanding that the moment was not merely a reunion, but a manifestation of years of care, trust, and emotional connection. Baxter's gradual engagement and gentle acceptance of Logan's presence conveyed a powerful affirmation of trust, loyalty, and the enduring impact of attentive, compassionate relationships between humans and animals, filling the sanctuary with a quiet, heartwarming energy that would resonate long after the moment had passed. As the day progressed and sunlight streamed more fully into the sanctuary, Baxter moved with a renewed sense of purpose, his massive frame now reflecting a calm strength rather than the fatigue that had shadowed him for the past 9 days. Logan remained at the edge of the enclosure, his presence steady and reassuring, watching every subtle gesture and glance that Baxter made, understanding that the culmination of this interaction would define the remainder of the day and reinforce the trust that had been built over years. The gorilla stepped forward slowly, placing his enormous hands carefully on the ground as he navigated the space between himself and Logan, a careful choreography of motion that balanced curiosity, recognition, and restraint. Anna observed silently, her breath shallow with emotion, recognizing the profound impact of this reunion not only on Baxter, but on everyone present who had devoted themselves to his care. Jake shifted slightly, careful not to interrupt the delicate exchange, noting the subtleties of Baxter's movements, the slight tilt of his head, the deliberate pacing, the soft, low rumbles that punctuated his breathing, each one signaling a deep, unspoken acknowledgement. As Baxter approached the front of the enclosure, he paused to take in the surrounding environment, noting the familiar layout of the sanctuary, the carefully placed trays of food, and the distant sounds of other animals, all while maintaining a steady gaze on Logan. The gorilla's attention was unwavering, his movements methodical, and yet there was an unmistakable warmth and trust radiating from him, a quiet assurance that his recognition of Logan was complete and sincere. Logan extended his hand gently, offering a favorite treat, and Baxter reached out with deliberate care, taking it slowly while keeping his eyes locked on the caretaker's face, a gesture that carried a profound sense of mutual understanding and emotional resonance. The sanctuary seemed to settle into a gentle stillness around them, the usual background noise fading as the shared focus centered entirely on this moment of connection. Each observer felt the weight of the scene, the quiet intensity of an unspoken conversation unfolding through gestures, glances, and deliberate motions that communicated more than words ever could. Baxter's posture relaxed further, his shoulders lowering as he allowed himself to engage with the environment more fully, interacting with the food and Logan's presence with a sense of ease and comfort that had been absent for the past days. Anna and Jake exchanged quiet smiles, sharing a moment of relief and quiet joy as the tension that had filled the sanctuary dissipated, replaced by a sense of warmth and completion. The gorilla's gentle acceptance of Logan's proximity and the simple act of eating from his hand signaled not only a physical reconnection, but also an emotional reaffirmation of the bond that had been tested by time and distance. The morning light reflected off Baxter's fur, highlighting the contours of his massive frame and the depth of emotion visible in his eyes, capturing a silent narrative of trust, recognition,